Hello. Hello, my name is Pranav Bommareddy, and I will be sharing my presentation, The Musician in the Music School, in as a completion for my final project for data science for economics. So yeah, this project really began with an interest sort of into looking into the orchestral labor market in America, which is really interesting because it's not studied outside of those, or it's not studied quantitatively. It's sort of thought of as a qualitative thing, and it's kind of wishy-washy. And a recent paper by Alfredo Munoz from the Boston Lyric Opera about um, sort of a very central idea in classical performing arts of that there being a meritocracy, that only those that are the best performers are the ones that'll end up on stage. He really comes to challenge that idea by showing that there's sort of empirical disparities to access to these institutions that go beyond the primary and secondary schooling stage, but are really about conservatory and college level training, which is where most change and I guess most decisions are made from an artist perspective. And he shows empirically that access to elite music training institutions, which he's himself derives empirically, like what is an elite music training institution. He says that access is sharply unequal and that this inequality is strongly correlated with sharply unequal demographic representation on the orchestral stage. So the institutions almost act like a filter. So even if, for example, the Boston Symphony might conduct blind auditions, well, the New England School of Music right next door does not conduct blind auditions. And if the New England Conservatory of Music is is sort of the biggest provider of musicians to the Boston Symphony, then we're already setting ourselves up for failure, so to speak. So I originally intended to do a full pure replication study as um, laid out in the For's guide for replication in the social sciences. But I honestly think that's kind of out of my scope given how complicated the design is. And just to explain a little bit, he has a very robust theoretical framework, and he wants to model this market as a tournament stratified market, which requires all sorts of fancy things that, to be honest, I don't completely understand. So I've tried to focus on a very specific question, which from a very specific part of his paper, I ask, does access to professional orchestras remain sharply unequal with when we include all of the League of American Orchestras, large budget orchestras? So he focuses specifically on group one, and I'm just kind of looking at all of the groups. My reasoning being, I'm less concerned with this idea that he expresses in the paper, which is how many musicians can essentially get one of the very few tenured jobs in the American orchestra, which pays enough money that you could, live, that could be your only job. When in reality, most musicians work multiple jobs, and that's not always because they can't get a tenured position, but because they prefer to. So in order to sort of capture that idea, I tried to look across the group, so not just at the biggest orchestras, but the medium-sized, the local orchestras. By local, I mean state level, which are still pretty big, to get a broader picture of where the inequality kind of actually is. My data set is again coming from iPads, from NCES, from 2011 to 2024, and this sort of novel idea that Dr. Munoz has created, which is sort of scraping musician biographies from orchestra websites to gather the information about where they went to school, because it's often listed. And then the demand side data is coming from the League of American Orchestras groupings of orchestras by budget and size. My methodology is quite long, but not complicated, just kind of tedious. Um, and basically, uh, the setup required a lot of packages because he uses kind of nice fancy visualizations, which you can see that there's a lot of packages for that. But then I didn't know that one of the things I learned was that there's other packages for data manipulation beyond just tidyverse, but that include reader and janitor, sort of clean up the data. Um, And then for data transformation, the sort of big things that were done was standardizing unit ID from the iPads data and data year, and also adding demographic counts and percentages and all those good stuff, and also clearly defining what we mean by underrepresented minority. In this case, Black, Hispanic, and Native American musicians, because Asian and white musicians are severely overrepresented in these orchestras. And for the orchestra side, I created a variable group number so you can sort of sort the orchestras by which group they're in. And musician data, of course, we link the musician's school to the iPad's unit IDs. Those are connected. We standardize institutions and we join it to the musician data. So that's the main sort of merge that's happening, the left join. Um, and primitive functions are basically the functions that Alfredo Munoz already created that are kind of central to the project. For example, there he has functions to making a K coverage set and, for all these statistical sets. The K coverage set one is really important because that's kind of the foundation of the way he does it. And so I've kind of directly pulled the code from him. The core analyses are kind of where I changed the code a lot, and because this is where I had to tweak my approach. So basically, the idea that he is introducing is instead of just saying, oh well, these universities are prestigious, so they must be part of the elite universities. He tries to find an elite metric, or sorry, an empirical metric for that. The way he does that is essentially across all of the tiers of the orchestras. He does what's a K coverage test, I believe, which basically how many schools does it take to whose musicians collectively who work in these orchestras end up being at least 50% of the orchestra's members. It's a little bit complicated, but I guess it's the least number of people it takes to, least number of schools it takes to make 50%, to account for 50% of orchestra members. And what we find in the K50 test is actually it's just 12 schools. So in the overall set of all orchestras, all 12 schools account for 50% of all orchestra members, which is, quite concentrated. And I tiered them out separately between one, two, and three, and then together, all of them, top eight, which are the top eight largest budget orchestras in America. And basically, you find that you never need more than 11 or 12 schools to cover 50% to account for 50% of members, which is quite concentrated. Um, yeah, and I also, found attrition rates from population to profession. So basically, how much in the general population of people are, the demographic counts, and how much are we losing in the professional orchestral stage, and then seeing where the loss is happening. So of course, we're seeing loss in just starting. There's fewer Black and Hispanic students just coming in at the undergraduate level. Um, but once they do come in, they're also not ending up on the professional stage at the same rate because of this cause that he's identified and that I've also shown, which is the constraint of these elite institutions. So this first visualization, I think, clearly shows that. Oh, and I should mention a kind of significant result actually is that with my tiering out of the system, which makes it actually more lenient, I'm not just looking at the biggest budget orchestras, I'm looking sort of across the labor market in general. The elite schools jumps from 7 to 11 to 12, and the schools that we've added are Oberlin College, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Northwestern University, and the University of Southern California, which is consistent with anecdotal evidence about what are considered prestigious or good music schools. Oh, and also the Manhattan School of Music. So this first illustration clearly shows that if we look at the population, for example, of all graduates and the sort of racial breakdown of that, what that looks like, I mean, you could argue, well, that's kind of, no, well, not similar, but I guess expected for what we think of as the American music schools. But then if you look at the elite graduates, if you look at how that's broken apart, again, this other that you see here, I know it's kind of like, well, what is the other? Well, the other is international students who are documented as non-resident aliens in IPEDS data. So we can't tell the racial characteristics. And so we kind of have to just assume, but again, we know from just which countries is that they're coming mainly from Western Europe and from Asia, from East Asia. But yeah, so from the elite graduates, we see that 40% of elite graduates are white musicians. So actually, I guess a lesser portion than from all graduates. However, they make up 79, 80% of professional musicians. And what that can be attributed to is sort of these elite institutions, which in a way hoard, uh, um, or not hoard, sorry, that's the wrong word, collect overrepresented minorities for various reasons. And those are not really explored in the paper. And because they kind of become signaling institutions, and these institutions have a wide influence over who is hired where, once you get in, you've kind of given yourself a leg up. So, yeah, that's that. And then this table shows attrition, which I think is really important, where we're seeing really high rates of attrition in Hispanic and Black musicians. Um, and yeah, that trend is really not continually uh, improving. And I think this third visualization shows that, where even though on the whole schools are diversifying, like there's fewer and fewer white students every year, and there's more and more underrepresented minorities, it's not translating to the orchestral stage because of the elite institution filter, where any of the gains that are being made are not being made on or within the elite schools. So the demographics within those schools are remaining relatively similar, and that's creating even wider gaps between elite institutions and non-elite institutions, which are continuing to diversify and increase their share of underrepresented minorities, but that's not happening on the elite side, and it's creating issues on the professional stage because again, we're seeing that the constriction is in favor of elite universities. Yeah, overall, I think I did pretty well. I hope that was a good explanation. I definitely think I bit off more than I could chew, but yeah, I hope that was interesting. Thank you.